Welcome back, DPReview TV viewers. It is Chris Niccolls here, and look at this very interesting design. I have not seen a normal to super telephoto lens design like this in many years, but Tamron has come out with this brand new 50-400 Di3 VCV XD, and we've got this in Sony full frame E-mount, and big thanks to Gary Chung, our friend, for letting us borrow his personal Sony A1. Very expensive camera, especially because he knows I don't use neck straps, so hopefully he gets it back in one piece. But I've got this super zoom lens that's very versatile, so let's wander around and see what we can get with this colossal range. Now, of course, the lens that covers this kind of focal range is going to also have a little bit of bulk to it, but it's not as bad as I thought it would be. This lens is pushing 1150 grams, just over half a knock, but that is quite manageable. It's balancing quite well on this A1 with a battery grip on there. And like most of the new Tamron lenses, we've got a pretty rugged design here, so everything feels nice and tight. Manual focus ring is a little bit loose, but the zoom ring is really nice and smooth. We do have some weather resistance here, even with that little USB port there on the side. And why do we have that? Well, that is so that you can then use the Tamron Lens Utility app and customize what your custom button does here. You got a switch here to choose between 3 functions there, as well as your vibration control modes, where you're going to do either stationary or allow panning, or just turn it off completely. Now, you do get a lens hood provided here, of course, and this has actually a very compact 67mm filter thread diameter. I like that. We got a locking switch here, which we can lock it at 50mm so you don't get lens creep as you're walking along. I haven't had a problem with that, though, with it unlocked so far, but it is a brand new lens. And lastly, we do actually have an option here for a tripod collar. I can see the markings at 90 degrees. I can also see the detente to attach it, but it is an optional accessory. They don't include it. Now, because the Tamron 50-400 is a VXD designated lens, that means it has a linear motor, and I'm finding the focus not only smooth and silent, but nice and snappy. So it's certainly getting me from middle distances to infinity very quickly, which is great for sports and wildlife. I don't think you'd have any problem shooting action with this lens in that regard. The other thing I would say is for manual focus, although it is maybe a little bit loose feeling, I do like that you can customize using the Tamron Lens Utility app, whether you want to have linear response in that manual focus, which could be really nice for video work. So why 50-400? I mean, I think I mentioned earlier how it's been a long time since we've seen a lens like this. And the last one that comes to memory is the Sigma 50-500. People often called that the Bigma, and it was physically quite large. It was almost a knocked in weight, 95mm filter thread. It was made for full-frame DSLR mounts. And again, it was that versatility of having a lens that you could do a lot with. Now, this does drop the focal length down 50-400mm, and so that does kind of make it a little bit more compact. This is the first mirrorless lens we've seen with this kind of focal length, but I think the same still holds true. It's that kind of lens that you can have maybe a small wide angle and this, cover a lot of range, or even just leave the house with only one lens and at least know that you've got a lot of focal lengths to play with. But there are still some compromises. And the main compromise is going to be something that's fairly common along a lot of super zoom kind of lenses, and that's usually a pretty slow maximum aperture range. Here we're getting f4.5 at 50mm going to f6.3 at 400, and so already there's a compromise, because you can often get even super telephoto zooms with maybe a little bit more light than that at the long range. The other thing I'm finding is, although this is very versatile, and I can see it being great for like outdoor journalism or something, there are some situations where I just can't really get very thin depth of field, or situations where, especially at the more telephoto range that I have, even on a bright sunny day, to raise the ISO higher just to get the shutter speeds that I need to get sharp pictures. And of course, when we do our lens test, we often try to shoot everything at 100 ISO, and I'm not always able to do that successfully here. So if you're okay pushing up the ISO, you do get the versatility, but I would still absolutely feel undergunned without having at least maybe some fast primes with me, or a quicker, normal range lens in my camera bag at the same time. All right, let's talk about flare next on the Tamron 50-400. It's actually very well controlled. So we are seeing a little bit of ghosting, absolutely, but it never really gets excessive. Not a lot of loss of contrast, not really getting big washed out frames shooting towards the sun. So it's doing a good job there. So if we're gonna have one piece of glass that can do many different things, it also has to handle close-up photography well, and this certainly does. So very impressively, at 50mm, we can get 1 to 2 life-size reproductions. So half-size macro, actually very decent, but you're focusing very close, like within the actual lens hood itself. So you're gonna take that off if you wanna get even closer. At 400mm, though, we get a lot of working distance. We're still getting 1 to 4 macro capability, not bad. So overall, walking around here trying to get close-ups, I'm finding this can absolutely be up to the task. So how does the 50-400 look as far as bokeh goes? Well, first off, specular highlights. We are getting some cat's eye in the corners wide open. When you stop down f8, that does go away largely, but it's still there a little bit. And I would say the bokeh does have a bit of a soap bubble effect, kind of a brighter edge, not crazy. I would say that when it comes to the out of focus to in focus transitions, we're getting a little bit of a sort of energetic look, but overall it's actually really quite smooth. So with such a big zoom range, this lens won't be sharp, right? Well, actually, surprisingly, it is very sharp. Let's first take a look at 50mm focal length here, shooting wide open in the center. We're actually getting lots of detail. When we stop down to f8, I'm really not noticing much improvement. I mean, I would say we get a little bit more contrast overall, but the sharpness looks very similar. Even to the corners, it's really holding up quite nicely. Here we focus upper left corner wide open. No real difference. Stopping down to f8 improves things just slightly, but again, it's very minor. So what about at 400 then, where you're probably going to shoot this lens a lot? Well, looking at the centers again, I was actually very impressed. I mean, shooting wide open at f6.3, we're getting excellent detail, and it's kind of the same story. Stop down to f8, a little bit more contrast, but otherwise I'm not really noticing much more detail. And again, the corners hold up in a very similar fashion as well. Overall, I think if you're using this lens, even on a high resolution body, you're going to be pleased. So should you get the Tamron 50-400mm lens? Well, I think the first thing to appreciate is there's just really nothing like it on the market that's native for mirrorless mount. And it is fairly compact given what it does, and optically actually a pretty sweet performer. If I was going to shoot wildlife though, if I had a high-speed Sony body and I wanted to maintain that high burst rate, I would probably go with the Sony 200-600. And if I was on a budget and I didn't need the high burst rate, I'd probably go the 150-600 from Sigma. I'd still want that 600mm. I think that's worth it just for the wildlife. But if you don't necessarily need that focal length, this lens represents excellent versatility, not just for the incredible focal range that you get, but also close-up capability and the fact that it's actually a really sharp lens. Now, as always, you can check out our sample gallery at DPReview.com. That link is in the description below. And let us know what you think about the return of this very unique range, the normal to super telephoto, super zoom. It is quite a unique piece. There really isn't anything like it right now. Subscribe to the channel, the Instagram, the Twitter, it's all there, the likes, the notification bells. Click all that, and then I promise we will see you soon for another episode of DPReview TV.